I'm really excited because today I have here with me Todd Fink, who is an artist and thinker, and who's already taught me so much about mindfulness and tons of tricks and tips on how to take back control of technology. And I'm excited for him to share those with you today. Todd is also the co-founder of the band, the Giving Tree Band. And a year ago, you started a podcast called Kind Mind, and he very quickly collected 10,000 or more followers, which is so exciting. It tells us that he knows what he's talking about. So let's get into it.
Thanks, Mom.
So when we first talked, I had just done a video on digital detox where I'm talking about how we should take control of technology. And you pointed out how important intentionality is in helping us deal with this social media addiction that a lot of us have fallen into. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that a little bit more. What's this intentionality and how can it help us?
Well, intentionality in terms of mindfulness is that aspect where we try to keep our awareness more in the present moment and our choices more purposeful. And in the case of technology or social media, it's really easy to fall into a passive pattern where we're using it, but really it's more using us. So, and most people don't feel good about the amount of hours they're spending on these different apps, and that's where the intention piece comes in. Intention is all about living purposefully and living in alignment with your values. If we're more purposeful, we can get a lot more out of technology. We can actually feel good about the way we're using it. There's a race for attention, and it's hard to say what the limits are of what designers will do to try to keep you engaged for an additional second, 2 seconds, and beyond. And they'll use all kinds of emotional manipulation to keep people engaged, and that's where things get a little bit dangerous, I think, in terms of protecting our own mind.
Self-awareness and intention can help here. How do we really apply those though? And why does it sometimes seem like it's not enough? Because we have tools now that tell us, oh, you just spent 4 hours on Instagram today. But it seems to be hard for us to go from being aware of that to actually changing that. We look at those numbers, and after a while, we actually become blind to them. They stop losing their effect on us.
The pattern with social media use or technology use is totally analogous to other addictions. And I think it seems so benign because you're not actually ingesting anything. So we can comprehend that people could get addicted to drugs, people could get addicted to alcohol, food, and so on. But if you think of those types of addictions, even knowing this isn't good for me isn't enough, right? Somebody can know they're getting into trouble or they're using alcohol too much or it's really starting to impair their life. Same with food. We can know that we don't want to have as much sugar as we're having, but in the moment we can't make that choice. And there are some real disruptions to the circuitry in the brain that account for this. When you get the drink or the food or the win at the casino, there's a release of dopamine in the brain, and that floods the reward circuitry, and it creates a feedback loop that makes craving and a propensity to do that behavior again and again and again.
Dopamine is the happy neurotransmitter.
That's right. It's a feel-good transmitter. It's also a motivating transmitter in the brain that makes you want to repeat that habit. And it can be associated with more and more things. It's not just when, like, the hit of cocaine comes. The dopamine can start to be released just by seeing the cocaine paraphernalia. And so
the anticipation of the feel-good can also trigger dopamine.
Which is what's driving people back to the phone to see, did I get a like, did I get a comment, did I get a message? And
is that why we're checking so often?
That's right. I mean, the last I heard, it was well over 100 times that people check per day with the phone. And it all adds up to about 9.5 hours on average of screen time.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to show you what my numbers are showing.
I'm sure mine is
we have this
similar. I mean, like, because I know that I have the ability to fall into these patterns. So I try to put a couple safeguards in place for myself. Like more recently, I decided I'm not going to look at my phone in the morning until after I've done my hygiene and showered and brushed my teeth and all that and gotten dressed. Because if I do that as the first thing, I'm not going to be able to stay true to my intention. If you ask me what is an ideal morning routine for me, I probably wouldn't say, well, I'd like to wake up and stay in bed with the phone above my head and scroll through a news feed for the next 45 minutes and get lost in that. I don't think many people would say that.
No, and it's funny because that again we keep talking about intention. It's such a central concept. We have these meetings at work every morning where we set the intention for the day, and somebody asked me, what's the difference between an intention and a goal? And I was surprised that the difference was lost to them, because an intention is more than just a goal. It's about how I go about my day, at least to me. Yeah. Which is why it's so important. We have no email hour Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10. And I tell my team, take that time to set the intention for the day. Don't jump straight into email, because it seems like sometimes we start this action online and then we can't stop ourselves. And before you know it, it's 3 p.m. and I never stop to think how I want my day to go, what I want to accomplish, how I want to feel at the end of the day. So how can we help people understand a little bit more better what intention really means and how it's different from awareness or self-awareness, how it's different from goal setting?
Yeah, and you made a good point about how I want to go about my day. So I think the key word is how you want to live. And it's an important question about how do we find out what our intention is, because it really comes down to core values. And there are probably dozens and dozens and dozens of values that most people could look at and say, that's really good to live that way. That's important to me. But the reality is you can't honor all values for two reasons. The main one is that there's just limited time. Mm-hmm. You can't both choose to start a family and choose to be single and independent at the same time. If there was unlimited lifespan, you could have family for 100 years and be single for 100 years. So you have to make choices. So you have to decide between the two with anything, and also within a given day, what you will honor above other things. And if you don't know that ahead of time, people will fall victim to the second one, which is high distractibility. Things will come our way and they're good, but they're not necessarily in alignment with what we truly care about. So how do you figure this out? Well, it's a good thing to do some kind of experiment where you narrow down to like 3 to 5 values. So one thing I do with clients or patients is I ask them to pick 10 top values out of a long list, to just circle 10. And then they'll write them down on like sticky notes and post them on a wall. So you got 10 in front of you. Then I'll give them 30 seconds to remove 3. And then take a rest. And then another 30 seconds to remove 2 more, take a rest, and then another 30 seconds to remove 2 more, and you're left with 3. And if that doesn't quite feel right, you can do it again. But it's not easy to come down to 3 values. But it's important that we do it because you can't honor everything. And ultimately, this is going to be what defines a person. What they end up doing the most is what we know about them in terms of a person's values, what they care about. And once it's narrowed down like that, you start to think about how you want to live then. Me having peace and kindness as 2 of my core values, it's not going to be me mindlessly scrolling through news feeds in the morning. So when I plan with my values, I think I want to get up early enough so that I can calmly enter in my day, that I can sit for meditation in my room, maybe read a little bit of something that I want to read and learn from, like an inspiring book or poetry, have breakfast, and then check emails and get into the business of my day.
But as you're describing this, you realize that people who are addicted to social media, they just had a panic attack, because you just described 2 hours where I don't know what I'm missing. What if somebody's texted me? Yeah. What if somebody's posted on my Facebook wall? People have this anxious reaction when they put away their phones. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, and that's why it's so analogous to addiction, because like I have friends who are parents who have had to set limits with their children, and there will literally be like a 2 week withdrawal period where there's tantrums, and it almost looks like a medical detox is necessary. So you're right, but that's really the brain craving the behavior to try to get the same dopamine pattern. I mean, what we're basically at risk of with addiction is really requiring that we do more and more and more of it to actually feel good. So you're going to be more prone to depression. You're going to be more prone to anxiety when you need this to constantly feed that reward circuitry. And just like other types of addiction, that same hit is not going to produce the same high again and again and again. A person has to do it more often, and they have to do higher doses, and that creates a never-ending pattern.
We only have 24 hours a day. What happens when we run out of those 24 hours?
Well, then you just see that what is happening in insomnia, 33% of adults suffer from insomnia at least sometime throughout the year now, which is dramatically higher than prior to the internet and social media age. So we're just seeing patterns like this, and the blue light from the screen hitting our eyes is also interfering with the production of melatonin, which is a sleep hormone, and it's just disrupting different cycles. So we have to find a way to educate ourselves and put safeguards in place. And I think ultimately if a person just has a mindfulness practice, you start to fall in love with what's happening in the present moment. And that's what is interfering with that. Is like when you're looking at a phone, you're not really in the here and now. You might be looking at what someone else is doing, but they're not here and now with you. And the more we get disconnected from that, the harder it's going to be happy. Children growing up with the phones and with social media are missing an opportunity to face discomfort. And this is what's leading to more cognitive distortions and the inability to be uncomfortable for even a moment. Like, you don't have to talk to adults anymore. You have instant access to your friend as a child. So without any practice speaking to adults, growing up, having to face certain situations triggers anxiety and panic attacks and leads to more avoidant behavior. It's like when the phone rings, people get anxiety. Because I would have to talk to somebody if I answer it. And we have all these ways of buffering ourselves from those real challenges, like communication challenges. Like for me to grow up and talk to my friends on the phone, that meant I had to inevitably get to know everyone's parents and go through them to access my friend. But that builds the ability to face discomfort, and it improves communication skills. Now, other people may say, well, that's just not how the world's going to be in the future, and that may be, but if we're suffering from anxiety all the time, we certainly could benefit from something in between.
So parents, employers, it's good for us to encourage our employees and our kids to be a little bit more aware, because otherwise we may see a fairly dark future for them from what you're saying. I mean, if they're avoidant, that poses all sorts of communication challenges, which leads to all sorts of interpersonal challenges, and these folks are going to hurt. They're going to suffer.
And I think we're seeing some of that with younger generations, where it's really hard to be uncomfortable at all, and we don't want to set up future generations to have distorted patterns of thinking, that everything has to be instantaneous, and that you don't have to wait for anything, and you don't have to be outside of your comfort zone, because it's difficult to grow psychologically. Psychological growth actually only happens through strain. If you think, and I'll circle this back to intentionality, because if you think about how we grow ourselves in any other way, physically, we go to a gym, and what do? We strain ourselves. You run and you get tired, and that's what makes you have more endurance. You lift weights, and then they become too heavy, and then everything becomes easier to lift up. So the same applies to psychological growth. If I don't strain myself, then I don't actually get to grow in my own character and my own values. There is no kindness that will be developed in a human being by surrounding that person with favorable circumstances. The only way to grow it is to actually be challenged and come out kind, you know?
And by the way, we did a video on this just recently on how pushing through pain is the way to grow and win. It's lessons from athletes on how they are able to do that. But it sounds to me then that Facebook, by being an escape, it's truly holding you back.
So we may be depriving some of this psychological growth, but it has yet to be fully studied and
Studied
understood
and
because we
proven.
need more time.